Hi everybody, this is Wendy Lokanc-Diluzio, and this presentation is on using research to understand human sexuality. So what's ahead? In this presentation, I will provide a brief overview of quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods research. Some of you may not need this information, so please feel free to skip through if that's the case. Some of you may need more information, and if you do so, you can do a search on Google, searching videos, and you can learn more about qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. On that note, I think it's really important that as you're taking this course that you're self-directed. So again, it's okay to skip through the things that you already know or aren't necessarily applicable to your professional or personal life. I'll also be briefly discussing ethics in sexuality research. I'll be providing a research example, and then I'll provide some tips for referencing and citation. So what is qualitative research? It's an approach for exploring and understanding the meanings individuals or groups ascribe to a social or human problem. The process involves emerging questions and procedures. The data collected is in the participant setting. Data analysis inductively builds from particulars to general themes, and the researcher makes interpretation of the meaning of the data. Quantitative research, on the other hand, is an approach for testing objective theories by examining the relationship among variables. The variables are measured by instruments, and numbered data is analyzed using statistical procedures. So the way I think about the difference is with qualitative, you might be interviewing somebody and there's words, and the researcher is interpreting, analyzing the data to find, typically you're looking for themes or conducting a thematic analysis, whereas in quantitative research, you have numbers and you're using your software to help with analyze the data. Mixed methods research is an approach to inquiry involving collecting and integrating both quantitative and qualitative data. The core assumption of this form of inquiry is that the combination of the qualitative and quantitative approaches provide a more complete understanding of a research problem than either approach alone. Here is a comparison of quantitative, mixed methods, and qualitative research in terms of design types, types of data, methods, data collection, data analysis, and interpretation. I'm not going to explain what all the terms mean, as all the information from this table is in the optional reading by Cresswell. If you're new to graduate studies, I would recommend reading through the Cresswell chapter so you're familiar with the words and terms. If you're completing a thesis that is research-based, consider the type of research you would like to conduct, the question that you want to answer, as well as the philosophical worldview. Prior to starting any type of research or any type of recruitment or data collection, you do need to go through ethics. So what that entails is an application for ethical approval needs to be submitted to the ethics board assigned to your institution. Part of an ethical study is creating a consent form that complies with your ethics board. Participants should be told that they can stop participating in the study at any time without any type of penalty. When working with the data, researchers should use computers that are password protected and have screened timeouts. When transmitting information, there should be secure mail or transport, and as well as firewall or virus protection. Any paper and pencil questionnaires, interviews, or transcripts, related notes, tapes, and memory sticks should be located in a locked cabinet in a safe location. Questionnaires, notes, and interview transcripts need to be shredded, and the interview recordings need to be erased after a certain period of time, as per the ethics board. Really depends on the ethics board. I believe for University of Alberta, it's 5 years. I believe with University of Calgary it was 7 years. But it's just important that you're aware, if you're conducting research, what the policies are for the specific board you're applying to for ethics approval. Depending on the nature of the study, participants can be told that if they are emotionally distressed, they will be referred to a variety of free and confidential community supports. So the next part of this presentation, I'm going to provide an example of a sexual health education study that myself, as well as Heather Cobb, have been involved in, as well as another colleague of ours, Dr. Sandra Riley from the University of Calgary. So the name of the article is Training Parents and Service Providers to Promote Healthy Sexuality and Relationships Among Youth with Intellectual Disabilities. This is an article that we finished writing this summer, and it's in the last stages before I send it into the Canadian Journal of Human Sexuality for publication. The purpose of the study was to explore and compare the effectiveness of two types of training programs, face-to-face or blended learning, that aim to build capacity of parents and service providers to promote healthy sexuality and relationships among youth with intellectual disabilities. The research questions guiding the study were: how do participants regard either their blended learning or face-to-face training experience? So what we were getting at with that is learner satisfaction or learner reaction. Do participants experience an increase in knowledge after participation in either a blended learning or face-to-face training experience? Do participants experience an increase in perceived comfort after participation in either a blended learning or face-to-face training experience? Do participants experience an increase in self-efficacy after participation in either a blended learning or face-to-face training experience? Do participants experience a change in attitude? And how do participants reportedly use their training after participation in their blended learning or face-to-face training experience? In terms of study design, we used an embedded mixed methods quasi-experimental design. So quasi-experimental means that the participants were not randomized into groups. The embedded design is a mixed methods approach whereby one set of data offers a supportive, more secondary role to another set of data which is more predominant. In terms of this study, there was an emphasis on the quantitative aspect of the research, whereby the qualitative data were intended to provide meaning, depth, enrichment, and clarity to the quantitative findings in order to produce a more complete picture of the findings. The independent variable was the type of training, so either face-to-face or blended learning. The 6 dependent variables were participants' reaction or satisfaction with their learning experience, knowledge, perceived comfort, attitudes, self-efficacy, and use of training. The choice of the variables was based upon an evaluation model developed by Kirkpatrick and Kirkpatrick. Participants' knowledge, perceived comfort, attitudes, as well as self-efficacy were measured 3 times via questionnaire. So prior to the training program, so that was time 1, immediately after the training, time 2, and 6 weeks after the training, time 3. Learner reactions were measured immediately after the training, so that was at time 2. And self-reported use of the training was measured 6 weeks after the training program. So once again, that was time 3. 8 participants were interviewed and interviewed several weeks after the training program, just so that we could get their perspectives of the training program and to get more information regarding the program outcomes. In terms of sample size, an initial sample size of 58 training program participants, or 29 per group, in order to achieve a power of 0.8 was calculated. And I had a statistician that was working with us and helping us guide us through our calculations as well as the data analysis. However, to account for participant attrition, an adjusted sample size was calculated. So a recalculation using an attrition of 20% per data collection time helped us arrive at a new sample size of 92, or 46 per group. The inclusion criteria for this study included parents or guardians of youth aged 12 to 24 with an intellectual disability, service providers currently working at an agency or organization serving youth with intellectual disabilities, and service providers employed at one of the agencies as a behavioral therapist, licensed nurse, licensed social worker, educator, speech therapist, psychologist, or youth worker with a minimum of a high school diploma. In terms of the data analysis, the quantitative and qualitative data underwent separate analysis, and then the data were integrated. So the quantitative components of the questionnaires were analyzed using SPSS. Quantitative data analysis included descriptive statistics, independent samples t-tests, Fisher exact tests, and two-way repeated measures ANOVA. One between subject factor group of 2 levels and one within subject factor, time of 3 levels. So that was called a 2x3 design. And once again, I had a statistician that helped me with the language and helped with the design and the analysis. All statistical tests for significance used an alpha level of 0.05. The qualitative data underwent qualitative content analysis, which is defined as a method for the subjective interpretation of the context of text data through the systematic classification process of coding and identifying themes or patterns. So once the quantitative data were analyzed and once the qualitative data were analyzed, I then put the data together to make a more complete picture of the findings. So in terms of the training program or workshop content, it was actually Heather Cobb who implemented the training programs, and the content included puberty, hygiene and self-care, personal boundaries, healthy and unhealthy relationships in the context of friendships and dating relationships, sexually transmitted and bloodborne infections, safer sex, including contraceptive methods and condoms, as well as community sexual health services. The principles of andragogy, or adult education, as well as constructivist learning theory, guided the development of these face-to-face and blended learning workshops or training programs. Okay, on to the findings. A 32-item questionnaire measured knowledge about puberty, sexual development, sexually transmitted and bloodborne infections, birth control, condoms, and community services. The face-to-face group average scores were 51.6% at time 1, 89.3% at time 2, and 73.6% at time 3. The blended learning group average scores were 55.9% at time 1, 86.4% at time 2, and 77.2% at time 3. Overall analysis indicated statistically significant increases in learning when comparing the results of time 1 to time 3. The qualitative data from the open-ended questionnaires and in-depth interviews supported the quantitative findings. For example, a blended learning participant said, "Good information. I learned a lot about how to help my son with disabilities, but also my typically developing sons. Great resources to go to after the course will be helpful as well." In terms of perceived comfort levels, a 10-item questionnaire measured perceived comfort levels addressing various sexuality topics. The face-to-face group average comfort scores were 74.7% at time 1, 87.3% at time 2, and 84.7% at time 3. The blended learning group average comfort scores were 72.7% at time 1, 86.4% at time 2, and 87.2% at time 3. Overall analysis indicated statistically significant increases in perceived comfort when comparing the results of time 1 to time 3. So again, what that means is that it was one thing, we were happy if there was changes in comfort when comparing time 1 to time 2, but often over a period of time you expect it to drop. But in the case of our findings, it just showed that the levels of comfort were sustained. The qualitative data collected from the questionnaires and interviews supported the quantitative findings. For example, a face-to-face participant said, "Face-to-face allowed for the comfort level of the staff to be raised. What initially started as a quiet room ended up in discussions that were ongoing over breaks and questions answered, resources shared among the group." In terms of self-efficacy, a 9-item questionnaire measured confidence in oneself to help youth with intellectual disabilities regarding sexuality and relationships. The face-to-face group average self-efficacy scores were 70.4% at time 1, 86% at time 2, and 85.6% at time 3, whereas the blended learning group average scores were 63.8% at time 1, 85.5% at time 2, and 86.6% at time 3. Overall analysis indicated statistically significant increases in self-efficacy when comparing the results to time 1 and to time 3. And again, time 3 was 6 weeks after. The qualitative data collected from the questionnaires and interviews supported the quantitative findings. For example, a participant in the blended learning program said, "It has been a good educational tool. I feel more confident as a support worker in understanding my role with sexuality." In terms of attitudes, an 8-item questionnaire measured attitudes and was implemented to both the face-to-face group as well as the blended learning group. The face-to-face group average attitude scores were 84.5% at time 1, 88.3% at time 2, and 88.5% at time 3, whereas the blended learning group average scores were 84.5%, 88.1%, and 89.6% at times 1, 2, and 3 respectively. Overall analysis indicated statistically significant improvements in attitudes when comparing the results of time 1 to time 3. In terms of learner reaction or learner satisfaction, a 6-item questionnaire using a 5-point Likert scale was used to rate various components of the training. The face-to-face group ratings ranged from 4.68 to 4.9 out of 5, with standard deviations ranging from 0.304 to 0.516. So with those tight standard deviations, it just meant there was a real strong sense of agreement between the results and between members of the group. The blended learning group ratings ranged from 4.6 to 4.88 out of 5, with standard deviations ranging from 0.391 to 0.628. The only item that produced ratings that were statistically different between the groups was the mode of program delivery, with the face-to-face group producing a higher score than the blended learning group. In their open-ended responses, face-to-face participants said the depth, breadth, and type of content and resources were strengths of the program. And for example, one participant said the program was very informative while concise. There was an excellent balance of broad and specific information. In the open-ended responses, the blended learning participants said the depth, breadth, and type of content and resources were strengths of the program. For example, an in-depth interview, one participant said, I thought it was all really good, and I don't say that about any lecture or workshop. So I'm not just saying that to pay lip service, but I actually really appreciated the content because I've received very little education about talking about sexuality with anybody really, other than my client assessment. And these were the questions, and that's it. But then having to put that into context of someone who may have a disability plus or minus, like an intellectual impairment, was very daunting because people are uncomfortable. They are not sure what level to speak at, those sorts of or reasons. So I felt like, yeah, the content was very helpful. In terms of the use and usefulness of the training, 6 weeks after the training, 65.4% of face-to-face participants and 54.8% of blended learning participants had reportedly used the training information. Fisher's exact test indicated that differences between the groups were not significant. Participants were also asked to rate the usefulness of the training on a 5-point Likert scale, ranging from poor to excellent. The mean usefulness score for face-to-face participants was 4.42 with a standard deviation of 0.64 compared to 4.4 with a standard deviation of 0.67 for the blended learning group. Independent samples t-tests indicated differences between the groups were not significant. For those who had used the information, participants were asked how the information was used. In both groups, participants had used the information with students or clients or their own children. For example, a face-to-face participant said, I spoke with my son about puberty and masturbation, whereas a blended learning participant said, when encouraging youth and teaching them to wash their hands after using the washroom, to close the door when using the washroom, and to respect the personal space of others. For those that did not have for those who did not use the information, they said that there was just no opportunity to use it at that point because it had only been 6 weeks. So in summary, the mixed methods data suggested that both the face-to-face and blended learning training programs were effective and acceptable mechanisms for training parents and service providers. Okay, so I just want to move on to a quick discussion about referencing. Something I would consider is some kind of a reference management platform, especially if you plan to take several courses or if you're working, on your master's degree where you have to take several courses. I wish that I had invested into a reference management system at the start of my doctoral studies. I invested in one as I was writing my dissertation, and it was helpful, although it would have been much better if I would have used it from the very beginning. I completed my degrees at the University of Calgary. They offered short workshops on these reference management systems, which I found helpful. I would guess your respective institutions, as well as University of Alberta, would also offer similar types of workshops. So different types of reference management systems include EndNote, Web, RefWorks, or Zotero. It's beyond the scope of this presentation for me to get into any detail about how to use them or to show these reference management systems, but it's, again, something, if you feel that you're going to be taking several courses, I would just invest in investigating if one of these are a good choice for you. So a referencing quick tip that has helped me a lot is just using the cite button with Google Scholar or with any other of your platforms that you use to get to obtain your articles or do lit reviews. So this is just a screenshot from Google Scholar, but I had, punched in the name of an article, so foundational best practices for online sexuality education, and then you click on the cite button, and then I will turn the slide so you can see what comes up. So here's a screenshot of what you see when you press the cite button. You have all the different citation versions, so MLA, APA, Chicago, Harvard, Vancouver, for this class, as well as like the classes that I take or that I teach. APA is the standard. So in terms of this article, what we would do is just copy and paste from the APA and put it into your citation list. And this saves hours and hours of time. So something I do want to just stress is that sometimes these citations are incomplete. So you just have to double check that it has everything, or sometimes there's an error, but for the most part, I'd say probably 95% of the time, it does a perfect job at referencing peer-reviewed articles. Well, that is the end of this presentation. So now I want you to do some reflection, and I just want you to think about what. So what was the most important concept I learned in this module? So what? This was important because. Now what? Two things I need to explore further are. If you have any questions on this presentation, please feel free to email me. Thank you.